because I am boring you to death. Thank you.
We begin with yet another escalation from the president to end the special counsel's Russia investigation. For what appears to be the first time, President Trump tweeted a direct demand to his attorney general, saying, quote, Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. We should note, of course, that Sessions has recused himself from all things Russia. And the tweet, which came mid-Twitter rant about the investigation more broadly, sure seems to be a tell that despite his aides saying they're not worried about the trial underway of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, the president is, in fact, very worried about something. Now, Manafort is on trial for bank fraud and tax evasion, and on Tuesday, we got our first glimpse at Manafort's defense strategy, namely to blame his former deputy, another former Trump aide, Rick Gates, as well as Ukrainian oligarchs for whom he worked. Manafort's attorney says Gates had his hand in the cookie jar, attacking him as the star witness and an embezzler. Now, the prosecution, meanwhile, is working to highlight Manafort's extravagant lifestyle, saying he had a cash spigot while working for his Ukrainian golden goose. They say he's a liar and that he, quote, orchestrated these crimes. Two officials tell CNN that President Trump is keeping a close eye on the proceedings and asking for frequent trial updates from his team. I'm going to get straight to CNN's Shimon Prokupecz joining me now. And Shimon, let's begin with these tweets from the president and the significance of them. What are you hearing from your sources at the Justice Department? Are they taking this as a demand, or are they just saying this is the president blowing off steam?
Well, yeah, Dan, I mean, certainly significant. I think you said it right. This is an aggressive move, aggressive words from the president here. So far, the Department of Justice has not responded in any way to these tweets, to essentially the president demanding that that Sessions end this investigation. You know, it's a longstanding practice, as we know, that the president does not interfere in investigations by the Department of Justice, does not comment on them, does not offer suggestions. And clearly, by this morning's tweets, that is not anything that the president follows, and certainly has not followed. And when you think about why there is this obstruction of justice investigation by the special counsel, what started it off, what set it off, was what he did to the FBI director, the former FBI director, James Comey. You know, and I sort of wanted to point out sort of what he told the then FBI director Comey about the Flynn investigation, and then what he's tweeting today. If you look at what he tweets today, he's telling the Attorney General, essentially, you should end this investigation. And then when he met with Comey, as you will recall, he told Comey, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go and letting Flynn go. Certainly, you know, those words perhaps one can interpret as a little softer than the words today from the president. But if you see and you think about that, that's what set off, was part of what set off the obstruction investigation. And then certainly the words by the president today, certainly significant, and it goes into the obstruction investigation, and something that I think the president and his lawyers know the special counsel will be looking at.
So interesting. I'm really glad that you pointed out the similarity in language there, particularly since there are reports that the special counsel is actually looking at whether tweets can be used as obstruction of justice. Let's look at the trial. What's happening in the Manafort trial as we speak, Shimon?
Well, today's really been, so there have been two witnesses so far that have testified. One of them, I think the important witness here, this just understand now, is the FBI agent who entered Manafort's home. They did a search warrant at his home in Alexandria, Virginia, and they're talking about some of the documents that they found. And this really goes to the meat of the prosecution's case. These are documents about his loans, bank records, things that they found with his name on it, wire transfers, sort of goes really to the meat, sort of to the heart of the case and the evidence that the FBI has gathered and now the prosecution is using in the case. Significant there also today from the FBI agent is that he's describing how they entered Manafort's home. They said they came to the home at around 6 a.m. They knocked on the door 3 times, announcing that they were there. When no one answered the door, they entered. They had a key and they went in. And there were some questions about the FBI's tactics here back when this happened. People close to Manafort were saying that the FBI was very aggressive and how they went into the home. Clearly today, the FBI disputing that account, saying they did everything right. They knocked on the door, no one answered, and then they went in.
So interesting. Shimon, thank you as always for your excellent reporting. Appreciate it. And here with me at the table to share their reporting and insights, CNN's Phil Mattingly, Times' Molly Ball, CNN legal analyst Shan Wu, who represented Rick Gates briefly after he was indicted, and CNN's Caitlin Collins. Hi, everybody. Oh, my goodness. So let me just start with something that was tweeted by the president shortly before we came on the air, and it kind of brings all of these questions of the morning together, and I will read it. Looking back on history, who was treated worse? Alphonse Capone, legendary, okay, we'll hold out for a second, legendary mob boss, killer, and public enemy #1, or Paul Manafort, political operative and Reagan Dole darling, now serving solitary confinement, although convicted of nothing. Where is the Russian collusion? Now, putting aside that we've all taken tours of Alcatraz and it wasn't exactly nice digs, what do we make of this? Caitlin, I'm putting this to you first.
Well, I think the last thing that Paul Manafort's legal team wanted on the second day of his trial was for the president to compare him to Al Capone.
Alphonse Capone.
Yeah, Alphonse, first reference. But we're seeing this. The White House for the past few days has been saying they don't know what the president's reaction to the Paul Manafort trial is. They haven't spoken with him about it. But we heard from the president for the first time this morning, only on day 2 of this trial that is expected to go on for at least 2 or 3 weeks, what exactly his feelings are as he's watching all of this play out on cable news. And this is also coming as the president and the White House are trying to downplay Paul Manafort's role in the campaign. That has been their strategy for months now, and we've really seen them ramp it up over the past few days, including from Kellyanne Conway and Rudy Giuliani. So inside and outside of the White House, and even from the president himself, saying that he was only there for a short period of time. But Paul Manafort was there for a very crucial period of time, including how he attended that Trump Tower meeting.
I mean, they can say all they want that they don't really care and they're not paying attention, but every tweet that the president sent this morning completely undercuts that argument in a big way. What do you think it means?
Well, it's a little surprising he's so worried about it, because actually...
Do you think there's something there that he's worried for a reason that we just don't know about?
That could be. I think it's just the pressure of the trial actually commencing, getting to him, because frankly, I thought the first day went pretty well for the defense. Actually, I'm just like a breakneck pace. It's incredible they got through the jury selection openings and got to a witness. That's just amazing. But Ellis interrupted the prosecution during their opening.
The judge?
Yeah, the judge, Judge Ellis did. And that's very disconcerting for the prosecution. And I'm sure Manafort's team liked what he said. He pointed out that there's nothing wrong or illegal about having a lot of money. And I think they probably put that in the win column for the day.
Yeah, okay. So you might be right. Were you going to say something about what you think this could be about?
Well, I thought that the president's tweets about Manafort this morning were very striking because they were sort of a reversal, as Caitlin was saying, from this distancing act. Rather than say whatever he did, he might have been terrible, but it had nothing to do with me. He's expressing sympathy for Manafort. He's saying Manafort's being treated unfairly. He's saying that Manafort had these glorious credentials working for Reagan and Dole. Now, one of the things that was discussed in the trial yesterday is that the activities of Manafort's, the money-making, the allegedly illegitimate money-making that they're talking about, was 2010 to 2014. So that's well after he would have worked for Ronald Reagan or Bob Dole. To answer the president's question about why didn't anybody bring this up when he was working for Reagan?
Yeah, I mean, and that's another question the president was tweeting about this morning. Why didn't anybody tell me? I mean, that's the gist of one of his tweets this morning. Why didn't anybody tell me about the bad stuff that Manafort allegedly did? Well, really, just pick up the phone and call somebody, or ask him, or ask anybody. What happened to hiring only the best people?
I think the interesting element with Paul Manafort is it wasn't a secret kind of the circles with which and within which he operated in Washington, D.C. If you look through disclosures to the extent that he made them, and sometimes that ended up being a problem legally, it turns out, he wasn't representing necessarily Fortune 500 companies. He was dealing in the areas of lobbying or influence peddling that kind of operate in the darker areas of D.C. And some of his partners and some of the people he worked with, if you talk to anybody who covered K Street or covered Paul Manafort coming up or covered Roger Stone coming up, any of those guys, there was an understanding of kind of the place that they were operating here that could potentially lead him into trouble. I will note, as a random aside, since he brought it up, Solitary confinement. He's meeting with Republican senators on criminal justice reform today. If he has a huge problem with solitary confinement, it can be addressed at 2:45. That's important. That would be a step forward.
But for white-collar criminals, I don't think that's exactly what the topic is.
Things to keep in mind as they are downplaying the role that he had is that the president stayed in touch with Paul Manafort for months after he left the campaign. He left in August, and then they stayed in touch for months after that. The president has often done this with people who left the White House or left his campaign, but also with Rick Gates, Paul Manafort's deputy, who is testifying against him. He left as well shortly thereafter Paul Manafort, but he and the president stayed in touch, and he served on one of his inauguration committees. So it's not like that the president completely cut off access with them when all these questions started coming up, which is why Paul Manafort left. They stayed in touch for months thereafter.
And Jan, I want you to react to this because the whole gist of what he's saying this morning.
Department official in some way related to ongoing investigations, I think it potentially can fall into the pattern of activity that could form the basis of an obstruction allegation. So his tweets are one part of it, his actions are another, different efforts that he's taken over the course of his presidency, but certainly it's one piece. You know, it's interesting on the statement that his Twitter feed is just his own personal opinions. You know, there was a case brought by the Knight Institute at Columbia University, and the judge found that his Twitter is a public forum. So there actually has been some legal consideration from the court's perspective that it's not just, he's not in a private capacity when he makes statements on Twitter. And the last thing I'll mention, just with respect to his pressure on the Attorney General, his statement today is really consistent with what he has been doing. It was last July of 2017, that he gave a New York Times interview where he also was placing pressure on the Attorney General to take certain action with respect to the then acting FBI director, Andy McCabe. And that month, July of 2017, there were just days after days